Every great takeover starts with a crisis. Sometimes the crisis is real. Sometimes it's made. Sometimes the fire of the crisis is seen early, but certain people will benefit from seeing the building burn, so they do nothing. 1907, America was thrown into financial chaos. Banks were failing. The stock market was collapsing. People were lining up outside of financial institutions, desperate to pull their money out before it all vanished. And just when the nation was in its most vulnerable, the same elite bankers stepped in as superheroes to save it. And this was the prelude, the introduction to the Federal Reserve. Now, the Panic of 1907, it all began with a failed attempt to corner the copper market, which triggered a collapse in the price of the stock of the copper. Now, for the people out there that don't know what is cornering the market, listen, I already know a lot of y'all are drug dealers already. There's people out there that are not drug dealers that don't know what this means, so bear with me. So let's say you are a lover of Jordans and you find out that they're no longer making the Jordan 5s. No! And it's a very popular sneaker. You go out there now and you buy up all the Jordan 5s. So now everybody that wants the Jordan 5s, they have no choice but to get it to you. And because you are the only option that they could get it from, you get to set the price on what they pay in order to get it. This is the same thing that rich people did with the copper market. They bought up all the copper and it failed. And there were certain people and banks that wanted to ride the wave and jump in on the scheme, just like the people who try to jump in on the scheme of the AMC and GameStop fiasco, the stock.
Guilty.
And the 2008 with all the home loans. They couldn't pay back their loans, and this started to scare everybody. Then rumors started to come out that these banks were starting to become on the verge of collapse. They were going to be insolvent. And this was the age before deposit insurance, the FDIC. So now everybody started to run to their local banks and pull out all of their money. There was a stampede. They called this bank runs. But most of the bank runs were happening in these small independent banks, not the big Wall Street banks. But as the panic spread, there was one man that stepped to restore order. And that man's name was J.P. Morgan. Morgan personally organized a syndicate of big New York bankers to get together so that they can inject capital into the system. Newspapers started to hail this man as a hero. But here's the problem. The entire crisis had exposed what the bankers had been warning Congress about for years. We need a central bank to stabilize the system. In other words, the panic was the perfect sales pitch, whether it was orchestrated or whether it was just simply exploited. It worked. People used small banks mostly because of location, convenience, and access to credit. They trusted the people in the banks with their money in their neighborhood more than the elites that were far away from home for them. It was only after repeated panics that the public started believing big centralized banks were the safer option. So now they got the people on their side. So before the crisis, there were thousands of banks in America that were independent from Wall Street. They were issuing their own currency notes, their own policies. They did not need the larger banks in order to survive. And that was a big problem, at least for the ones that want control. But when the panic happened, hundreds of these banks were wiped out. A lot of them got swallowed up by the larger banks. And the ones that did survive, they were more open to being centralized for stability. Now enters Senator Nelson Aldrich, one of the most powerful men in Congress at the time, and a man with deep ties to Wall Street. He just so happened to be father-in-law of John D. Rockefeller Jr., which made him part of the Rockefeller family network. Aldrich chaired the National Monetary Commission. He created it in the aftermath of the panic in order to study banking reform. But instead of traveling the world for solutions, Aldrich already had his answer. The bankers themselves would write the plan. So in November 1910, a small group of the nation's most powerful bankers boarded a private train in New Jersey, headed south under a veil of secrecy. They used only their first name or code names, so servants and staff would not know their identity. Where was the destination to go? Jekyll Island Club. An exclusive retreat off the coast of Georgia that was owned by J.P. Morgan himself and frequently visited by America's wealthiest families. Obviously the Morgans, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, just to name a few. Now, who were the attendees of this meeting, you ask? The attendees are Nelson Aldrich, the U.S. Senator, Paul Warburg, representing European Rothschilds, Frank Vanderbilt, president of the National City Bank of New York, today's Citibank, Henry P. Davidson, which is J.P. Morgan's partner, Charles Norton, president of First National Bank of New York, and Benjamin Strong, the head of J.P. Morgan's Banker Trust, the future first governor of the New York Fed. And their mission was to create a plan for a new central bank, but one that wouldn't be called a central bank to avoid public resistance. Over 9 days of meeting, they drafted a proposal that would create 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, privately owned by member banks, give control over the monetary policy to a board influenced heavily by the bankers, allow the Fed to create money by issuing credit-backed government debt, and to present the system as federal to gain the public's trust, even though it was essentially a banker's cartel. Paul Warburg, I keep saying that man's name wrong. I don't know why. Paul Warburg later admitted that if the plan had been presented honestly as a banker-controlled institution, it would have been voted down immediately. Fast forward to December 1913. After years of lobbying, backroom deals, and public persuasion, the Federal Reserve Act was brought to vote on December 23rd, when many members of Congress had already gone home for Christmas. With just enough votes present, the act passed. President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law the same day. But the irony is that earlier in that same year, Woodrow Wilson would write in his book, The New Freedom, a great industrial nation is controlled by its systems of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civil world. John D. Rockefeller reportedly wrote in his memoirs, "Competition is a sin." And that was exactly the point. The Federal Reserve eliminated competition in money itself. By controlling the supply of credit and currency, the elite bankers now held the nation's economic pulse in their very hands. The panic of 1907, it scared the people. And the meeting in Jekyll Island sealed the deal. And on a cold day in December in 1913, United States has handed over the keys of their money to the private banking cartel, who masked their names under federal. And this is how the Federal Reserve was born. On the next episode, we will discuss how the private banking cartel have used and leveraged their power now on the world. And now not only changing America's financial system, but now changing the global financial system. Thank you for watching.